January 2022 announced itself with an Arctic blast that blanketed North Central Washington starting on January 6th. Cities and counties declared a weather emergency, opening the door to assistance from the Washington National Guard and other agencies. Snowfall numbers approached the historic record for one 24-hour period. Pangbourne Airport was shut down, and the blizzard left many people in rural areas isolated for several days inside their homes. The other perfect storm striking NCW was COVID-19. By January of 2022, the pandemic still had not relinquished its hold. In fact, local infection rates reached their highest level that month at more than 1,300 cases per 100,000 residents in the Wenatchee Valley. East Wenatchee City Hall closed to the public for 1 week due to high infection rates among city staff, and crowds began to overwhelm the COVID testing site at Town Toyota Center. January was also the month that the Chelan County Jail reported finding its first cases of COVID-19 among its inmates, and Douglas County Superior Court had to delay 35 criminal trials because it could not gather a jury without risking new infections. In Chelan County, the man who tried to strangle a Wenatchee Super 8 hotel worker was sentenced to 18 years in prison. James Lawrence Jackson Smith was convicted of first-degree assault and kidnapping in a December jury trial. Star Hernandez, the woman who fought back and survived the attack, testified at his trial.
It was scary because in the beginning, I didn't want to go and testify. I was like, I don't want to see this guy. I don't want him to look at me. I don't want to look at him. I didn't want to do it. And my prosecutor and my victim advocate, they were like, you have to do this. Like, it's scary, but, no, he can't hurt you. I kind of just got the courage, and I was like, okay, it's all right. He's going away for a long time. I know that. I just have to make sure I tell my side of the story and I tell it truthfully.
Also in January, Steve Wright retired after 8 years as head of the Chelan County Public Utility District, turning the office over to Kirk Hudson, the longtime managing director of Generation and Transmission. Wenatchee Valley College president Jim Richardson announced he would step down after 17 years leading WVC, and we learned that the Chelan County Sheriff's Office had paid out $425,000 to former Sergeant Mike Harris, who accused the department led by Sheriff Brian Burnett of retaliating against him when he investigated the loss of an automatic rifle from its armory. In February, we learned Douglas County Fire District 2 had disciplined 2 firefighters for falsifying documents to show they'd received full COVID-19 vaccinations. Both men subsequently resigned from the department. East Wenatchee pharmacist Jeffrey Reynolds, who provided the firefighters with phony credentials, was eventually fined $1,000 and sent to ethics training in order to keep his pharmacy license. None of the men involved was ever charged with a crime. The Greater Wenatchee Irrigation District finally became the owner of its own infrastructure. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation turned over the title to all the land, pipes, and pumps used by the water district for almost the last 50 years. District managers said full ownership will help them maintain and improve their irrigation service to 10,000 acres from East Wenatchee to Chelan. And Wenatchee Valley College used federal COVID relief funds to cancel $35,000 in student debt. The college said the decision affected 556 students who still had unpaid tuition or fees. In March, the pandemic began to wane, and most of the requirements for masking were allowed to lapse on March 11th. Local health boards had to reorganize themselves under new state laws, and Chelan and Douglas County commissioners appointed 5 new health board members plus 5 alternates. One of the full board appointees, Bill Sullivan of Wenatchee, was a skeptic who questioned the seriousness of COVID-19 and the safety and effectiveness of its vaccines. He's continued to voice misinformation about the pandemic at the Board of Health's monthly meetings ever since. The arsonist behind fires at 2 Brewster churches was arrested that month. Eduardo Martinez would later plead guilty to second-degree arson, second-degree attempted arson, and third-degree malicious mischief, and receive an 11-month jail sentence. Police in 2 states cooperated in the arrest of Juan Israel Gastelum, suspected of murdering his former girlfriend Yanira Cedillos in Moses Lake. He was arrested in Hermiston, Oregon, and still awaits trial. The annual point-in-time count of unhoused people in the Wenatchee Valley found 123 people living in outdoor areas, plus 275 people in shelters, transitional housing programs, or in hotels. 17 identified themselves as veterans, and 7 people said they fled home to avoid domestic violence. In April, former staffers at Confluence Health filed a lawsuit claiming the hospital and clinic system had discriminated against them when they refused to complete their COVID-19 vaccinations. State mandates and Confluence policy made the vaccination a requirement for health worker employment. The case was later dismissed by a Douglas County judge, saying it was groundless. Bethlehem Construction of Cashmere was ordered to pay $327,000 to a former employee after firing him in 2016, allegedly for complaining about poor working conditions and the use of racial slurs by managers on its job sites. Bethlehem has asked a judge to review the jury award. A shooting on Methow Street April 18th left one man dead and sparked a manhunt for two suspects who fled from police. 21-year-old David Vasquez died from a gunshot wound to the head. Benito Licea and Andrew Morrow were arrested after a chase that crossed the Columbia River into East Wenatchee. They're charged with second-degree murder, and both remain held in the Chelan County Jail. April also proved itself the cruelest month when temperatures suddenly dived to 32 degrees and below, and 13 new inches of snow blanketed central Washington orchards. Statewide, the cherry harvest for 2022 was 35% less than the year before, and for apples, the drop was 18%. Most of those losses were attributed to the late freeze and poor conditions for pollinators. On May 7th, a deadly shooting preceded the Apple Blossom Grand Parade as Wenatchee police shot and killed an East Wenatchee man who'd fired a handgun into the front door of Living Hope Community Church. One officer was injured. A second shooting by Wenatchee police killed a knife-wielding man on Western Avenue on June 4th. Douglas County commissioners abruptly said no to an agreement that would have annexed roughly 600 homes into the city of East Wenatchee. East Wenatchee now says it may pursue a ballot initiative to put the annexation to a public vote. And Bill Eagle was picked to join the Wenatchee School District as its interim superintendent, taking the helm after the departure of Paul Gordon. An intense thunderstorm that tore through the Wenatchee Valley on June 5th caused flash flooding in some areas and knocked out power to thousands. Number 1 and Number 2 Canyon roads were closed to the public while crews worked to remove mud and debris. An East Wenatchee man called in a bomb threat that emptied the Chelan County Courthouse in an attempt to avoid a court date of his own. And the West Kashmir Bridge opened with a ceremonial ribbon cutting, replacing the Goodwin Road Bridge across the Wenatchee River, which had aged beyond safe use. In July, the Wenatchee School Board opted to elect its members by districts rather than at-large voting. The changes, undertaken to avoid discrimination in school elections, take effect in 2023. A helicopter crash that nearly killed 2 people made a hero out of one of them. 18-year-old Logan Schneider was driving a tractor in his brother's cherry orchard when the chopper that had been drying the cherries struck a wire and crashed on top of him. Logan managed to climb out from under the wreckage and pull the pilot to safety before fire consumed both the tractor and the helicopter. Mariah Thornock became the new director of the Wenatchee Valley Museum and Cultural Center, and Grant County Sheriff Tom Jones retired from office, later to be replaced by elected Sheriff Joey Crete. In August, the first major wildfires of the year struck North Central Washington. The Moore Canyon Fire in Douglas County and the Irving Peak and White River fires near Lake Wenatchee eventually grew to nearly 23,000 acres combined. Along with major fires in Oregon and California, they would contribute to heavy air pollution throughout the Wenatchee Valley, which lasted through October. And Marine Sergeant Arthur Summers, whose remains were lost amid island fighting in the Pacific during World War II, was laid to rest in East Wenatchee. The site of Summers' grave was lost after the war and not relocated until 2019. He was welcomed home by his 2 oldest surviving relatives, nephews David and Donald McCannell of East Wenatchee, and laid to rest with full military honors. Arch Ecker, the voice of the Wenatchee Wild, died in September 2022. Ecker was a veteran broadcaster who spent more than 5 years calling Wild hockey games and occasionally guest hosting broadcasts for NCWLIFE. That same month, a dispute came to a head between Wenatchee and Chelan County over land annexations into the city. Mayor Frank Kuntz said the county was unfairly standing in the way of some annexations from the city's urban growth area. Governor Jay Inslee announced all COVID-19 restrictions in Washington would end as of October 31st. His emergency orders, which lasted more than 2 years, demanded vaccination, masking, and other steps in multiple sectors of the state, including health care. The Wenatchee School District announced it would build a women's softball facility to settle a Title IX complaint pointing out inequities with the men's baseball program at Wenatchee High School. The district set aside about $4 million, but the cost could reach $5 million or more, depending on how it's financed. And the Wenatchee River Salmon Festival found a new home at Rocky Reach Discovery Center, as renovations got underway at its longtime site at the Leavenworth Fish Hatchery. In October, Leavenworth's Oktoberfest went forward as planned, as did Leavenworth Oktoberfest in Wenatchee. The dueling celebrations became the focus of a lawsuit as the city of Leavenworth tried to stop the longtime festival organizers from using the name Leavenworth at their event. Those organizers are counter-suing over the rights to the name. The case could be heard in federal court next summer. Under smoky skies, U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg visited Wenatchee alongside both Washington senators and Congressmember Kim Schreier, touting the Apple Capitol Loop transportation project in Chelan and Douglas counties. That effort to ease traffic flow around the valley has received $92 million in federal funding and includes the proposed construction of a North Wenatchee bypass. Department of Fish and Wildlife officers shot and killed an adult female black bear that mauled a Leavenworth woman near her home. The bear was accompanied by 2 9-month-old cubs, both of which were captured for rehabilitation. In November, voters went to the polls and elected a new sheriff for Chelan County. Mike Morrison defeated 3-term incumbent Brian Burnett to become the county's top law enforcer. A narrower contest for Chelan County Commissioner saw Sean Smith of Cashmere elected to the job. And Marty Young became the first new Chelan County clerk to take office in the last 12 years. Douglas County elected its first ever coroner, a position previously held by the county prosecutor. Tanner Bateman ran unopposed to become the county's chief officer in charge of death investigations. Devotion, a Korean War air combat movie that was partially shot at Pangbourne Airport and around the Wenatchee Valley, made its debut in theaters. The Chelan County PUD's new headquarters and old station began to take shape, with the utility district opening up the main building for public tour. The Wenatchee City Hall officially opened for business at its new location, the site of the former Wenatchee Federal Building. And Wenatchee Valley College named a new president, Famous Harrison, currently the dean of the Stockton campus of California State University, Stanislaus. He was one of 46 applicants to replace Jim Richardson. He's expected to start work at the college January 3rd. December saw the Washington Supreme Court allowing the state to collect a new capital gains tax, even though a Douglas County court had ruled it illegal. Foes of the tax on high-end capital assets successfully sued before Judge Brian Huber, who found the tax unconstitutional. The Supreme Court said it will review the case on appeal from the state, and meanwhile the Department of Revenue can begin rulemaking on how to gather and allocate the money. Jefferson Robbins, NCWLIFE.